Hey guys, welcome to my new EQ series, which is all about EQ and EQing every instrument out there. In this episode, we do snare. Let's do it. Okay, so if you have watched the first episode of this series about kick drums, then you will know that it all depends on the recording. There is a quality that we need to be able to do good mixing and good EQ in the first place. So I have chosen a few snares here that are recorded from really good to quite good to not that good and everything in between. We'll have a look at that. And if you have watched my kick drum video, you have noticed that many of the settings are quite copy-paste. So the problems that we have in EQing most of the instruments, if they're recorded at a certain standard, like a baseline, decent quality standard, you'll have the same issues most of the time, which are, the rumble, mod, harshness, lacking treble, all of that. And it's not quite different with snare. If you have a somewhat decent recording, then you'll notice later that the EQ choices that we make are also quite similar. So let's do it. First, we have a snare, which is just a solo microphone, one snare top mic. The guy really didn't like bottom mics, and this is how it sounds. Okay, so you can hear this is quite a good snare. It is well pitched. Of course, the instrument itself has to be well tuned, well managed with resonances and all of that. So this sounds like a good quality snare, recorded most likely with an SM57. You can hear that it has quite a prominent low mid thump, and the top end is, it's kind of there, but not really. So we don't have too many issues with this snare, but let's see how we can make it sound like you would want it in a pop or rock song. I think this song was more an Americana kind of country kind of pop song, and let's see what we can do with this. So you can see it has a lot of body right around here between 100 and 500 hertz, which is very welcome. It has a lot of thump, it has a lot of punch, a good sound, and it has a little bit of the lows, but I can also see that it most likely has been EQ'd during the recording already, because it doesn't have a lot of the usual rumble that I encounter when I see snares. Just to be safe, I of course cut the lows again, and in this case, when EQ snares, what I like to do is, before managing or addressing any of the low mid issues that might be there, I like to set the treble, and in this case we need a lot of it. Let's have a look. Cool, so we have recovered a lot of the crack, a lot of the top end sparkle that was missing in the recording. As you can see, I like to use bell EQs, even though this one is so wide that it might as well be a shelf. It doesn't matter in this case that much. It's just my personal preference. In many analog EQs like the SSL, I like to use the bell because it doesn't boost that much of the high end spill, a lot of the cymbal content, a lot of the sizzle that we don't want in the snare. So this is quite a good sound, but I notice, of course, because all of the boosting that I have now, a bit of a tin can kind of sound going on in the mid-range. Let's have a look. So this is neither punch nor attack, so I don't need it that much, so I'm gonna remove it. Okay, this is a lot better. So you have cleaned up the sound, but it's lacking a little bit of body. So let's have a look at what we can do here. So I'm going to use also a bell here just for the same reasons, but you can use a shelf as well, as long as you don't do it too high, because what I want to do here is, you see this wide curve. I don't want this curve to affect too much the 500 and 200, because then I just recover a lot of the mud and the tin can kind of sound, which I don't want, of course. So it might seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to set the frequency that I'm boosting, or the center frequency, way below the actual frequency that I'm targeting. Of course, you can also use a shelf EQ, and I'll show you how. You just have to do the same thing. You don't want to affect too much of the 200, 500 area, and you want to make sure that you get a nice thump in the hundreds and maybe around the 100. Let's do a quick before and after. And again, like I said in the kick video as well, this is not the final snare by any means. Of course, I'll use a lot of parallel compression and other layers of processing to get this sounding really, really good, including some distortion. But this is the baseline. This is kind of the minimum where you want to get at in terms of mixing with your snares before you do any further processing. It is not uncommon to have to boost a lot of treble. And I remember in this particular mix, I actually ended up cranking one EQ completely. It was an SSL EQ, I think. 10 to 15 dB of treble boost, because in the context that's what was needed. However, I also used a very good noise gate that removed all the spill from the cymbals and the hi-hat, but that we'll cover in another video. The next snare we have is one that we also encounter a lot in mixing, which is a sample. And I have to say, this is a very typical sample. This is how sample makers kind of imagine the snares to be, and it's kind of also how it sounds in most rooms, but this is, in my opinion, not a very good sample and not a very good sound, especially not in the context of a mix, because it just has too much crackle, it sounds a bit artificial, it has too much of the snare bottom. I don't like the baked in room, so, you know, but what can you do? I mean, ideally I would contact the producer and tell him, look, I can give you a better one, let's try something else. But if not, because sometimes it's not possible, then you just roll with what you have. The reason why I don't like these kind of snares is because I cannot get a cracky sound. I cannot get a nice pointy top end on it, because it emphasizes the snare bottom, the rattling, too much whenever I boost the treble. So in this case, all I can do is a little bit of boost on the top just to get it a bit brighter, which will work better in the context of any mix, and also maybe boost a bit of the bottom to make it a bit bigger. There's kind of a woofy tone here. It's a woo woo, almost like a ghost kind of whispering in the background, which I want to get rid of. Of course, it is right at the resonance of the snare, which is in this case around 225. So because this is also the most prominent frequency and probably the bass frequency of this snare, I don't want to get rid of it completely. I just want to make it blend a bit better into the overall tone. So that's it. It's a bit livelier, it's a bit brighter. Of course, we don't have the spill and bleed issues, so we can use shelf EQs more, but it's not the best sounding snare, and if you can get anything better than this, then I would go with that. There are much better software than this one, and I don't want to say which one this was. Now let's have a look at a top and bottom snare combination, which is of course the most common way to record snares, and this particular one is from a client of mine that is okay, but not quite perfect. Let's have a listen. So it is a very long sound. It has a lot of rattle, but we can have a look at the bottom mic if it's coming only from that. It seems to have good thump, but it doesn't have a good attack that I think would cut through. But also this was kind of a vintagey rock ballad almost kind of song with 60s influences. So in the context, it's a good enough recording, I would say, but we still want a bit more of that hammery, punchy sound. Let's have a look at the snare top. Of course, before I do anything, I make sure that the top and bottom are in phase and in polarity. I have done this beforehand. Of course, I don't hesitate to move the tracks around so that everything lines up perfectly. Of course, it's never quite perfect, but you want to get it as close as possible. Here I'm gonna make sure the top, the beginning is at the same time. Okay, so even the top mic has a lot of rattle. Not ideal, but it is part of a sound and it might work. It has a lot of bleed from basically everything. Let's have a look at how we can manage this one. Okay, so as I'm boosting these upper mid-ranges, it is getting a bit more attack and I quite like it. It seems to work quite nice. And of course we get more of the rattle, so we might not even have to use the bottom mic, but let's keep going. Okay, so it's quite a big sounding snare actually. Once you do these kind of camel EQs, it is getting there, it is not too bad. I think with a noise gate and compression, this would already work as it is. Let's have a look at the bottom. Okay, so we have good rattle. Now what most people would do is they would cut all the lows to only get the rattling sound and then blend that in. Personally, I don't want to waste all of that good bass because you have a lot of it. Let's have a look here. It is as loud or even louder than the actual treble, so why waste it? You know, why not use it to our advantage? So I'm just gonna do the usual low cut around 50, 60, something like that. And I actually don't want to make it too zizzly, so many people might be inclined to do something like this. But then you just get a lot of rattle, and you will notice that if you boost a lot of it, you end up blending it in less, which then results in you having less of this and just a bit of this. So we don't want that, so I'm going to boost a little bit less of this, and I'm also actually going to have a look at the low end here. Because there's some good punch happening down here. This is not a bad sound. I don't want it to be harsh by any means, okay? If it was harsh, this is a decent recording. If it was too harsh, I would do a very narrow reduction to make sure that it's not harsh, that it's not ear-piercing, especially not in this kind of song. Let's have a look at the two together. Let's see what happens when we blend in the bottom. Okay, so you can hear that we get even more bottom, we get even more of the low-end punch doing this. And a bit of rattle, and I quite like this sound. This works really well. And again, with compression, a noise gate, which we do in another episode, and maybe a bit of parallel magic, this can be a really big and punchy sounding snare, but I think to start with, this is really, really good. Let's have a look at the before and after. This is before. The reason why it feels like it only became louder is because that's basically what we did, except that we didn't boost the volume of this range, which is the 200-500 range, which we don't want in basically anything, except maybe voice. So you want a lot of the top and a lot of the bottom. And if you study your Fletcher-Munson curves, the equal loudness curves, you'll note that if you boost the top and the bottom, that's when you get the increased feeling of loudness. Not just volume, but loudness. Big difference. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, big, rocky, powerful. This is well played, quite well recorded as well. A lot of bleed on it, but again, good gates, etc. It's manageable. Very big boom in the bottom, big muddy frequency there, but we have a good crack going on, so this I think can be a very nice and punchy and cracking snare. Now here the problem in the lows is so severe that I just want to get rid of it because I can't listen to it. I can't hear what's actually going on because this little bump here is taking over the whole character of the snare. If problems like this arise, just fix them. Okay, a little nudge here and we can already hear the snare actually instead of just this rumble. So we can hear there's a good amount of attack going on. We have very big body, of course, so let's see what we can do here. Okay, so this is a nice kind of thumpy but pointy sound now. Pretty good rock snare, but there's something in the mids I still don't like. And again, we have the 500 kind of tin can sound. So these are, as you can see, recurring patterns that just happen in every kind of recording. Bit on the muddy end still, but if I reduce more, then I'm just basically cutting the entire snare. So again, this is a somewhat compromised recording. It is not perfect. And if I remember correctly, I ended up replacing it in the mix, but don't tell anyone. So this is what we can do with it. Again, it might be salvageable. We might be able to fix it with noise gate and so, but it's not perfect. Bottom. Now here we definitely want more of the crack going on. So we have a bit more crack. It's good, it's better. So it's a workable snare and yeah, it kind of works. It's not perfect. Again, if this is, I think this is from a really heavy rock song and he wanted a proper rock snare and this is not a proper rock snare. So this will at least need augmentation with a sample or maybe even complete replacement, although it's not too bad. Let's do a before and after again. This is before. It's better, not perfect. We lost a bit too much body, but also we lost the woofy sound, which is good. Yeah, not perfect, but what can you do? So the next one is a very good recording. I find we have an SM57, a condenser, most likely a 451, and a snare bottom microphone of unknown origin. Doesn't really matter, to be honest, because they all record the same kind of sound. Okay, we have a good hammery, good top sound here from the 57, as expected. More body, more crack, bigger sound from the condenser, but also more bleed, which might become a problem later on. But this is definitely the better microphone, I would say. And the bottom. Nice and tight sound, actually. Really nice and snappy. It doesn't ring too much. This might actually be usable, although in many cases I just end up deleting the bottom completely. So let's have a look at what we can do with this. Okay, not bad. With just a few moves we were able to get quite a punchy, quite a strong sounding snare here. However, it still has a bit of a woofy sound that I want to fix, and I want to see if I can keep the body, keep the nice low end while getting rid of that tin canny woofy tone. And I'm gonna do this on the group, on the whole snare, because of course all of these 3 tracks, they interact with each other and frequencies build up, others cancel each other out. That's of course the nature of how sound is being generated when you combine multiples of them together. So let's see how we can fix this. Okay, this is quite good, and we have a lot of zizzle from the bleed, but again, good gate, etc. It's manageable, and with compression I think this could become a really, really punchy snare. Let's have a look at completely without anything. So big difference. Again, you can see that it's the same kind of settings that we use in these scenarios all the time, although slightly different movements, and of course that's where the nuance is when you mix. Remember, I never do anything without listening and then act. I might try different things, I'll have a look around, but this example or these examples show that the problems are usually the same or at least very similar. So these are very good starting points to look at, to have a look at the 2 to 500 range, have a look at where you exactly want to boost your treble and your bottom, but most likely, most of the times you will do these kind of moves when you are EQing snare. And in the previous video, kick drum, also very similar scenarios. Let's have a look at the last one. Amazing recording, incredible, I love it. I wonder who did it. Who knows, who knows? Let's have a look at the top. Jokes aside, it's good, but it's not perfect, of course. I remember what we used. It was, I think, a Black Beauty in a good room. We spent a bit of time tuning, but we only had, I think, 1 day to record the drums for 4 or 5 songs, which is a bit tight. We spent the entire morning tuning the drums and setting up microphones. And if you've ever done this, it is quite a crunch, you know. And then, of course, we had to record the drums. And I think we actually had to record piano on the same day as well. So it was 12, 16 hours of work, something like that. And we did the best we can. And this was what came out of it. It's not perfect, but it's good. I know for a fact that I EQ'd these going in. I had a bit of the cleaning up already done. That's why there's no real woofy mess in the mid-range, but we can still make it bigger. There's a little bit somewhere around here. So again, we get the same kind of camel EQ like previously, although slightly different frequency if we have a look compared to the previous snare. Looks similar, bit of different center frequencies. Here we have it at 360, here it's 204. The low end is mostly the same. Treble, here we have it a little bit lower, but same concept. Let's have a look at the bottom. Quite a big sound actually, usable. I think we can actually recover, we can get a bit more body out of this into the overall sound. Let's have a look. So here I made a compromise between what bothers me more. There's a bit of a muddy something around here, 250, 300, and there's the tin can kind of sound at 500. I don't want to EQ both, because then I just remove all of the sound basically. So instead I went for a slightly wider EQ here to remove the 530, which was bothering me. That will clean up a little bit of the 250, 300, where is this? Yes, 300-ish. Without completely removing it, because then we're left with nothing. Then we're left with like 150 bump and a bit of treble, and we don't want that. But we have a good attack here. We have a good rattle here, and in the 6, 7K range. It's almost a full sound just on its own. Let's have a look when we blend it in. This is big, this is pretty good, this is pretty good. Let's have a look without. This is pretty good snare sound as it is. It might be a bit too long, but it's something we can also fix again with a gate, which we do in another video. But the frequency is there, we have good punch, we have good attack, we have good rattle going on and the ghost notes as well. So this is quite a decent snare. Let's have a look and focus on the ghost notes as well, how well they come up. So we have a bit of a spike from the hi-hat, but otherwise it's perfect, and that hi-hat we can eliminate with good noise gating. And later, which is another trick, I might come back and I might really narrowly remove just the spiky hi-hat around 8K. Let's try it, let's see if it's possible. So in a really targeted way, we removed kind of the spikiest part of the hi-hat, but it doesn't change the overall tone of the snare that much. Let's have a look at before and after. So I can hear that the hi-hat became quieter, but the snare didn't change that much in my opinion, or at least the trade-off was worth it. So this is it about snare. As you can see, a lot of it or all of it again depends on the recording quality. There's just no way around it, and that's why I encourage everyone to spend extra time and extra care during the recording process. I usually, when I have studio sessions, I try to encourage the artists or the bands to have one extra day just for setup, which is when we tune all of our guitars, our drums, we select all the microphones, we even go through multiple drum kits and snares, bass guitars, cabinets, all of that. It's a lot of fun actually. It's quite a geeky thing, but we are geeks. This is what we love doing. We love messing around and having fun with a lot of expensive and fun gear in the studio, you know. So I encourage every artist, everyone who's going into the studio to set aside one day, pay for it. It's worth it. It's worth spending that extra day to dial in your tone, make sure everything is clean and tidy, then go home, get a good night of sleep, and then in the morning you just go into the studio, hit record, and it's awesome and it's sounding great. And that's so much more rewarding than going after take and trying to fix issues in between, and then you cannot edit the takes together, and it's just, it takes away the whole mind space. It's not nice. You're not really there in the moment recording, focusing on the creative process, on the performances, and all of these things that matter a lot more ultimately. So I hope you like this video and you like this series. If you want to work with me, you have my website in the description below. Don't hesitate to contact me directly. I do mixing, mastering, we can set up recording sessions if you are nearby or if I can travel to you. And of course, I do one-on-one classes as well. I usually do 3 class packages, but we can also do one class if you have a very targeted issue that you want to work on. These are usually 4 or 5 hours long, all of them, so you get a lot of time with me and we go through everything in a very detailed way to make sure that your work goes from wherever it is to a much higher level in a faster, less complicated and easier way, because none of it is actually very difficult. And I notice that most people are just getting lost in the many options and many YouTube videos and tutorials. And I just like to give you the base level knowledge, the understanding to take your work yourself from wherever it is to the next level. So my hope is that after we have done 3 classes together, you don't need any more YouTube videos. That's certainly what I aim for. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, happy mixing. Bye bye.